Peter's there. Wonderful. And I can't see who that is. It's somebody from, Masako.
We are live, guys.
All right. Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Experience series, where we talk to industry leaders about their personal journeys and the insights that can only be garnered from lived experience. So the Experience series is brought to you by The Hive and Hive Life magazine. This is our first online edition of the Experience series. So my colleague will actually be posting questions on the Experience series Facebook live stream. If anybody would like to get involved in the conversation, keep your eye on that comment section. Tonight, we have Patrick Newell. Now, this guy, you've got a long list of accolades. I'm gonna list them out real quick, okay? So a learning activist, an author, a professor of science, tech, and innovation, and of course, the co-founder of TedxTokyo and co-founder of Tokyo International School. How are you, Patrick?
I'm doing great. I'm sitting here in Shibuya in the Hive.
Yeah, same. All the way over in Hong Kong.
Cool, vibrant Hive-like atmosphere here. It's a very cool space.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad we could have you. So now let's dive right in. I've spoken to you a couple times already, and the interesting thing about you, I remember from our first conversation when I interviewed you for Hive Life, you're originally from California, correct?
That's correct.
Right. And when I spoke to you, what sounded to me, someone who doesn't speak Japanese at all, it sounds like you speak Japanese pretty flawlessly. Is that fair to say, or?
Yeah. You know, if you asked a Japanese person if they said they spoke flawlessly, they would say absolutely not, because in Japan, we are very humble. I'm far from flawless, that's for sure. But I can get around.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, you moved from California to Tokyo. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and sort of what sparked this passion that you have for learning and lifelong learning?
Well, I guess in regards to learning and lifelong learning, I really thought school sucked. And I really felt like I wasn't learning a lot and it was a waste of time. However, the system requires us to go through, jump the hoops. And so I jumped the hoops as best as I could with the least amount of time and energy into what I had to do in regards to the academic side of things. And so when I had the opportunity to actually create my own learning environment, the key question I kept thinking about and asking people was, what do you remember when you went to school? What were the highlights of school for you? And really the dream was to take that and then create an environment that would really foster what people remembered.
Right, yeah, no, fair enough. So why did you, let's start from the very beginning. What made you move from your life in the States to your life in Japan? What was the catalyst for that decision?
It wasn't because when I was 16, my role model was Donald Trump.
Right.
I kid you not, actually. When I was 16, he was a real rock star in kind of the real estate world. So I was living the American dream. I was living in Malibu on the beach with all the cool celebrities, and I was working for Beverly Hills Bank, and I was going to be a millionaire and all that kind of stuff. And then one day it just hit me how kind of lonely I was and how empty things were. And so I got a passport. I didn't even have a passport. Typical American, only 10% of Americans have passports. And I traveled around the world for a year.
Right.
And I went to India. This was 28 years ago. And India 28 years ago, is, it hasn't changed that much, but it was definitely like stepping into another planet.
Yeah.
And I went to Thailand and I was like, you know what? I really want to live in Asia. And then Tokyo, hands down, was the most modern city with everything you could ask for that we had in California, but at the same time, a really deep history. And so I decided I wanted to move to Tokyo for 5 years and just kind of see if I could become more Asian and less American.
Right. That was the goal when you moved there. You were like, I want to be like these guys.
I don't want to. I do not want to be like Donald Trump. Okay.
Making that clear. Got it. So, so you co-founded TedxTokyo, which is quite an achievement. So, why did you feel that that was an important pursuit, and how did that come about?
So I think it all kind of goes around having a purpose in life. And so when I started the international school for my children, there was huge purpose. When you start a school for your children, I mean, you can't have a higher purpose than that, really.
Right, Tokyo International School, right?
So that was a high level of purpose behind that. And I focused like everything that I had and every thought that I had into trying to create an environment that I thought would be really extraordinary. And I was 29 at the time, and it was in the kind of most competitive international school market in the world, and the oldest actually at the time. And so I got really bored because I just felt like I was banging my head against the wall because education was just not changing. It was staying the same. And so I had one of my friends that said, hey, you should go to TED. And I was like, what's TED? Who's TED? Kind of thing, right? And the movie wasn't out then, so I couldn't make the joke that it's the movie TED.
Right.
I went to TED in Monterey, and there was only 700 people there, and it was really intimate before it was famous. And I was blown away by the ideas and the variety of ideas and how I was just connecting things I hadn't connected before to have so many aha moments in a 5-day period of time. And so when I came back to Japan, I was thinking it would be really great to start something like TED in Japan. And at the time, TED was starting to become popular, and every city wanted to have TED come to their city, but it was impossible for them to do that. And they said, no, we can't do that. And then they said, we're piloting this program, and we want you to be part of this kind of the first series of these or beginning of this. And so in the beginning, we were called TedxTokyo.
Right. Okay.
And the co-founder of TedxTokyo, Todd Porter, had worked with Chris Anderson, who's basically the owner of TED.
Right.
And so we started this thing called TedxTokyo, which became TEDx. And we were the second TEDx event in the world.
Wow.
And we thought if we could take Japanese ideas, which most Japanese people don't speak English, and they don't typically share their ideas on stage, but if we could provide a platform where they felt safe and they could share their ideas, and we could spread those ideas around the world, we could have some major impact in Japan and moving Japan forward. And so that was the strong purpose behind TedxTokyo. And the other thing was, because of my background in education, I wanted to have TED for children as well.
Right.
And we launched TED Youth and TED Teachers global movement as well in Tokyo. So it was quite a neat kind of process because there was no there was no guidelines, there was nothing at the time. And nobody had been to TED except for myself. And so I had to try to translate that experience in a Japanese way that would find synergy with guidelines, because Japan is #1 for following the rules, and Japanese people will do anything if there's guidelines and a rule and it's okay to do it. Yeah.
Right. So when you sort of brought this to Tokyo, what was the sort of initial reception? How did people respond? Did people respond positively right away, enthusiastically, or was there some sort of hesitance?
Well, TED is very abstract.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, how do you describe TED, right? Especially in the beginning before it really had been articulated. Well, ideas were spreading. So we're going to gather a bunch of people and share ideas we're spreading. That's way too abstract for Japanese people.
Right.
And it hadn't been done before, really. So that was also really difficult. So wonderfully, there was a few really key people who believed in us and backed us and shared that with people. And because people trusted the people that were also involved in our network, they joined us.
Wow.
So it wasn't really like, oh, we get the concept. It was like, we know these are really interesting people and we know they're doing good things. And so whatever they're doing, we should be a part of. And that was really what sparked it.
Right. So it's very community focused. I mean, like most TED Talks, right? That's amazing.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, obviously you're very vocal about your thoughts on the change that needs to happen, not only to education systems, but to learning attitudes, right? So as the co-founder of an international school and as a professor, what do you think is flawed about our current education system, and what would you cut out first?
I would say I would cut out 90%.
Right.
Because I think we're really cheating our children out of their future. I mean, it is so bizarre and unlogical that we think that a group of 20 or 30 children, just because they're the same age, they should be learning the same thing at the same time in the same way.
Yeah.
There's no other time in our life we would do that.
Right.
And then if you think about a company, would you have a middle manager be responsible every day, all the time for a group of 30 employees? and be monitoring exactly what they're doing basically all of the time?
Yeah.
No, but we're expecting our teachers to do that. And then the ministries of education and the boards of education have all this content that these people are supposed to deliver in a short period of time and then be assessed upon that. It's just ridiculous.
Agreed. Yeah.
And so much of what they're learning will have no real relevance in their lives.
Yeah.
It's painful. And for me, school is about bringing people together to develop the emotional intelligence and the social intelligence. Well, there's no time to do that.
Yeah.
And if you look at how most learning organizations, all the way through MBA programs, they're not assessing people on their emotional and social intelligence or the future skills they may have or the skills they will need in the 21st century. So it's completely backwards, stuck in a 20th century model that needs to explode. And then you look at all these prep schools and cram schools to get kids to go in or after school programs.
Yeah. Those are huge in Hong Kong. Yeah, absolutely.
It's just robbing the children of their future and making them spend their time and wire their brains in a way that won't really have any relevance in their life.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, I was a teacher for a few years, so I understand the whole being the middle manager of 30 kids at once. And, from a very young age, the thing that I noticed is that children have this thought implanted in their head that learning is an obligation. It's not something fun. It's not something that they actually want to pursue. It immediately breeds this sort of pressure that lasts throughout, as they grow up. So what I wanted to ask you is, actually, this question is prompted by the Hive Life article that we did together. How is our current education system preparing us for an unknown future that's changing at a pace like never before?
It's not.
Absolutely, yeah. So what would you say? Yeah.
And if we even just go beyond the K-12 system or the university system, if you ask most HR directors or HR people, right, who are really there to nurture people and assess them on what matters and then train and prepare them for the future, if you ask most of them, what are the future skills? What are the skills that people really need to develop? You will not get an answer from most of them. And then you ask them, how are you assessing them, even if they know them? You just get a blank look on people's face.
Right. Yeah. So do you feel like, sorry.
No, that's fine.
I was going to ask, so you said that you would get rid of 90% of the current education system. So do you feel like we should scrap what we have and create an entirely new learning process? And if we did, what would that look like from your eyes? At least as a starting point.
Imagine school is open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Right.
And all the facilities that we have, the gym, the robotics design thinking lab, to the maker lab kind of space you have, the soccer field, all of the facilities are there. But kids could go freely between them. Now, they probably have to schedule in some way.
Right.
And the teacher would be responsible maybe for 30 children, but all of the learning that the government is asking, the math, the reading, social studies, language arts, all of that would be done online, as much as possible assessed by AI,
right,
and just take all of that away from the teacher as much as possible and allow them to focus on what they love to do. Some teachers become teachers because they love the younger kids, children reading to them or reading with children. Imagine if you could just spend most of your day doing what you love to do, but so many teachers are doing things that they don't really love to do, and that doesn't translate into passionate, curious learners. Right. Imagine if a kid went into the soccer field area and their parents was notified, hey, Hito is now on the soccer field, and the parent could watch live streaming. Of course, this would be very regulated. Their kid playing soccer, and when Hito came home, his mom said, wow, that was an amazing goal you scored.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very separate world. Right? So the point, I think, really for learning environments is to develop what I call creative collective intelligence, which is to bring people together with each other and with nature to make and create things. So if you want to prepare yourself for an unknown future, you need to wire your brain for change. And how you wire your brain for change is making and creating things. So when you make something new, you actually are projecting into the future something that doesn't exist,
right,
utilizing your existing knowledge and connecting it in a way that hasn't been connected before to make something new. If you did that in groups with other people and connected with nature, that would be highly impactful. If you looked at what is it, about 1,400 hours or 1,500 hours that children spend in 1 year in school, I bet you not more than 10% of that time is focused on creative collective intelligence.
right.
The other thing that's interesting, you mentioned about lifelong learners, if you do the math, most kids are only in school 16% of the year, 1/6. Let's say they're sleeping for a third of the time, right? So half their time they're awake, they're actually not in school. So a lot of people put the emphasis on schools, but it's really the parents as the primary educators. What are they doing with the time that they have with their children?
Right.
I think is really important. And the other point, I think for us as adults, especially in Japan, I think it ranks in the lowest 20% for adult learning and continuing learning in the world, is the learning stops for some reason.
So with your own children, for example, I remember you saying that for Tokyo International School, you guys implemented, correct me if I'm wrong, sort of some gamification in your learning. Is that correct?
Yeah, so in the beginning, we never had textbooks.
Right.
And the way it's framed is that the children will have topics, subjects, or themes.
Yeah.
And the teacher would present that theme to them. And so like, say at 5 years old, it was like from farm to table. How does food get from the farm to the table? And the 5-year-olds would like come up with a bunch of questions. And this goes all the way through. And then the teacher would have their own questions, and then they would narrow them down and decide what the core questions are. And they would spend about 5 weeks investigating the answers to those questions. And they would link to, because the governments, no matter what, are always going to tell us that we have to learn certain things within a school environment.
Right.
And that's not going to go away. Right. And so we try to match up in the most interesting way through the inquiry process, through constructive learning in projects, which they call project-based learning, and bring that together in groups. And at the end, they will have some clear output that is relevant, and not just sit down and taking some tests to memorize things. They've learned it in a very deep, interdisciplinary way, like we do in the real world. We don't stop and say, I'm doing science now. Yeah. Oh, it's language arts. I'm writing something. I'm doing my language arts, right? I mean, again, it's ridiculous that the subjects are not interdisciplinary.
Right. So when you sort of give children or young people the opportunity to learn in the way that you've just described, what have you noticed about their attitudes and the way they engage? What is the response compared to traditional learning?
Well, if you think about it, how, and I don't know for a lot of the audience how they're feeling, but I know for me, it's been really, I don't think I've spent as much time learning in a long time than I have been in the last month and a half.
Right.
And so if you find something, it's really about being curious and wanting to learn more about something. So it's a certain level of curiosity, right? And so if you just step back a little bit and you say, 4% of the jobs are not going to be around in whatever number of years kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. So I need to reskill myself, or I need to find some deeper purpose or passion. And what's been wonderful, really wonderful about this whole lockdown situation, many people have been thinking about, what have I been doing? I haven't been connected with my family. I haven't been connected with nature. I'm living a zombie life. I'm not really living. I'm just going through my days as I go through my days. And I'm not really learning. I'm not nurturing natural curiosity. And not because we have access to technology and the internet and Dr. Google can tell us almost anything we want.
Yeah. It's
all there. We just have to find something that we love doing. My wife has been studying about sustainable fashion in an online course. And she has just been, I mean, it's amazing how much has changed her, just finding something that she loves to do. So it just really is about connecting with what connects with you and what gets you excited and what gives you a sense of purpose as well.
Right.
And just going deep.
Yeah, going all in, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier when you were talking about what education should look like. Now, you've written a few books about innovation and learning. What role do you think AI will play in the future of education? And what are your, more importantly, what are your concerns about the ethics of this? Have you seen an issue with bias in education when it comes to AI?
Well, what's interesting is I think with AI, there's bias in the data,
right.
for sure. There's bias in the people who actually are creating the algorithms, and so there's going to be bias. But what I think is just as interesting is that there's a lot of human bias, especially as teachers.
Right.
And I'm not even sure humans bias, how accurate that is. And one good example I had is when I was working with the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, and we were accrediting schools around the world. I would go to Kazakhstan or Sharjah or Estonia, and we had our standards and indicators. And the school would self-assess themselves, and we would look at how they assess themselves when we would come and visit them. We would see huge gaps. And those gaps, it was not that they were trying to deceive us. What they understood as excellence and what they understood was really best practice was really quite a gap from what we had expected in New England or what we knew as kind of 21st century educators. So there was a huge limiting bias for the students there. So what I'm hoping that actually AI can do is a few things. One is most things are quantitative. And so if you can quantify something, and you have a very good detailed description with levels and things, then it's a matter of matching it up with the data that you have to create an outcome, which I think will probably be somewhat fairly accurate.
Right.
The other thing that I hope that AI will do, and we talked about some of the ethical things, is there's a dark side to everything. In my future class, ethics was part of the class. And we looked at the black mirror. It was we just looked at a bunch of pieces of black mirror and we showed what that dark looks like, right? So when I think about creative collective intelligence or the concept of singularity, because I've been very involved with Singularity University, the concept of singularity is that the non-neural cortex is going to equal the neural cortex and have equal intelligence. Then what happens when AI has more, goes beyond human intelligence, starts taking over because deep learning starts to self-learn and self-organize and
right.
create something quite different. It can really get out of hand and maybe start killing people or whatever, right? But so for me, when I talk about this thing about 1 + 1 = 11, so it's the human together with nature, the human side, plus the tools of technology, and bring those together to create 11, 1 + 1 = 11. And the whole idea around that is we're self-monitoring the whole way to make sure there's a nice balance between the two. And the human side is really strong and really powerful. And what most people realize is technology is a tool. It's really supposed to be used as a tool.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to bring it back to what you said about lifelong learning, because I think that is sort of what we're seeing. It's very timely right now with everyone being locked in. Like you said, people are sort of delving into, learning again, taking courses and signing up to things because they hadn't had time before. So what would you say we can do to reframe the way we think about education to sort of make us want to be lifelong learners? Again, you said that technology and AI is a tool. So how would that go hand in hand?
So if you think about it, actually, most of our learning is informal. Most of our learning is informal, right? So when we're a child and then we finish secondary school and then some of us go on to college and then we finish college, we might have some professional development that our organization asks us to do. But really, most of the learning is informal. And so we can zombie out and binge on Netflix or whatever, and maybe learn some things from that. But really what we have to do is have a wish and desire to make ourselves and our lives better, and enhance that through the knowledge that we have, and really about connecting the unconnected. And so what happens a lot of times is people get very siloed in what they're focused on and what they're looking at. And they don't really see a lot of the things that are coming on the peripheral.
Right.
And so I think the key thing is to stay curious. And a lot of people are scared. They're scared because they think they may not have a job. Especially, it's been really interesting, this COVID-19 situation, is that people are like, am I going to have a job? Or am I not going to have a job? What am I going to do next? What can I do? And most people don't even know. Like, for example, I had a really fun with my family. We did the Gallup's Strengths Finder. And there's 34 traits that there are.
Right.
And what was cool about that for me is it actually, well, my number one was strategy. Number 2 was activator. 3 was belief. 4 was connector. And 5 was communication. I never saw myself as my strongest trait to be strategic. But what it did is it gave me confidence to kind of confirm who I was. A lot of the other points I agreed with. And then with that confidence, I was able to extend myself and go further.
Right.
And so what I would say is a couple things. Really confirm who you are, confirm what your superpowers or your strengths are, find what you love, be curious. And if you can connect it with some kind of science or technology, then you will find something that really you can do probably for a long time.
Right, because that's where the future's heading, right?
Exactly.
Right. So I just want to remind everyone who is tuned in right now, if you guys would like to contribute to this conversation, head over to the Experience Series Facebook page, and we will be fielding questions or comments from there. So just a little reminder for those who have joined in late. So you talked about how education has been quite informal. So that means that it's kind of like we're indirectly learning from the world around us, whether that's TV or our experiences or whatever, right? So I remember from our interview for the Hive Life interview article, you mentioned the gamification of learning. Now,
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what that means and how you think that would benefit learners?
So what's really interesting is that games in the past have been leveled, right? So you have level 1, level 2, level 3. Learning is also sequential.
Yeah.
Right, and leveled. And so once you reach this stage, so I've always said is that why not have children or people playing games and learning things at the same time? What's interesting about gaming is it's evolved into more role playing.
Right, yeah.
There's a lot of role playing games. So can you imagine if you're going through a jungle and you're trying to solve different things as a group, and you need to collect some energy tablets or whatever you need, food or whatever. Yeah. And that food happened to be some things that you couldn't integrate indirectly from the learning areas that the government wants you to do. For example, I'm talking about children. So imagine you get integrate most of your math, your science, your language arts, your social studies, all into a game of a role playing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it sounds maybe bizarre, but imagine if there's like 6 games and you could choose 3 of them. And if you finish those games to certain levels, you graduated from high school.
Right.
Because you learned all of the content that the government had asked you to learn, but you could do that through these kind of role-playing games where you're critical thinking, you're being creative, you're problem solving, it's project-based learning, it's collaborative. I mean, all the attributes are there.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it takes away from what most of our education systems are doing right now, right? Which is it's very focused on memory retention, memorizing everything. So I understand that, yeah, the idea of gamifying education would come from application, understanding, and like you said, critical thinking, which is an amazing idea. Oh, we've got a question in, I believe. All right, so we have a
question here from, is it Mickey-san? I can't read the name from here.
says, how much do you think COVID-19 accelerate to rethink about the traditional education system?
So for the last 5 years, so I've been focusing with Singularity University on disrupting Japanese major corporations. And so I started this program to see how all the exponential technologies could kind of come together and change the world like we've never seen before, working with the major Japanese companies, right? And I found that that wasn't quite my cup of tea. It was like dropping a dynamite stick into a big, aircraft carrier, and there was just a little boom that happened, but nothing really happened, kind of thing, right?
Right.
But what's been really wonderful is how this has forced traditional education to start looking into the next step. There wasn't a choice whether you went online or not. Everybody had to go online. So what's taken 10 years took 2 weeks or even a week. And what's been interesting is that people actually, so here's been the kind of response, right? Teachers are frustrated because it's more work than they had before. It's more difficult to have what they call classroom management and keep the students engaged. The parents are frustrated because they're not used to having their kids all that time.
Yep.
Right? That babysitting service called school that they sent them off to kind of thing is they were going to educate them kind of scenario, which I think is also kind of ridiculous because parents are the primary education. But there's some things that obviously, there's a lot of good things children learn at school. I'm not being that negative. So to answer the question is, I really hope that it changes things dramatically. And I'm not saying we need to come together as human beings, we need to connect with each other, but it doesn't necessarily need to be in the same way. So more of a blended learning model, I hope, comes out of this. And I truly hope this is going to be, the major disruptor that we will look back on in history and say, because of that, we finally stepped into the 21st century.
What do you think is the reason for the hesitation on these sort of governing bodies and the institutions that decide our education system? What do you think is the reason that they don't want to implement that change and push it forward?
So you said you were a teacher for a while, so put yourself back in the shoes of being a teacher, right? I think there's a couple of things. One is, I used to do keynotes for Apple. I used to do some consulting and advising for Apple many years ago. And I used to stand up in front of a huge audience of educators. And I would say the most important thing with technology is to find which tools best align with what you hope to deliver with the children or hope they learn. Right? Mm-hmm. Give them these tools and get out of their way.
Right.
Get out of their way. Teachers fear they need to know more than the student. It's the old, I'm going to be the sage on the stage. I'm going to tell you what you need to learn. And you're going to remember what I said. And then you're going to do this test and share that with me.
Right.
But students actually tend to know more than the teachers do.
Yeah.
And students
can that a few times, yeah.
Right? And students can teach each other, and that's a powerful way to learn is by teaching somebody else kind of thing, right? So I think there's a fear of them not being in control, not really understanding things. There's huge learning curves for them. And if you've been teaching for a while, your brain has become pretty hardwired. So it's more difficult for new things to come and for you to be open to new things.
Right, absolutely. No, that's very well put. So we are coming to the end of my interview questions, and we're shortly going to move on to the crowdsourced questions that I got from our Hive people at the Hive here in Hong Kong. But before
you go, I just want to, something I've been having fun with recently, there's a lot of people are talking about the new normal.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing a lot of webinars and things like that. And I like to kind of frame things in a way that people can really quickly understand and grasp. Yeah. And so I've been looking at 3 things with this new normal, as they call it, right? And I've been asking people, what are you going to cut? What are you going to keep? And what are you going to create?
Right.
So if you think of yourself as a lifelong learner, or in your life, or within your country, It's not a matter of what you could. Make the decision of what you are going to cut, what you are going to keep, and what you are going to create. Could be for your child, could be for yourself, it doesn't matter. And one way to really help with that is to, and so I wrote a book in November. It's been 6 months, it's amazing. And the framing of the book was, how do you see Japan in 2030? And people would create these visions for that. And I have a survey actually on my website on 21foundation.com that asks 10 questions. And 5 of those questions are, how do you see Japan in 2030, right? So it gets people to think about kind of a big picture scenario. And a lot of people will say, well, there's, this is automated and this is that. And they have all these different ideas of what's going to be like. Then I asked them, what is your 24-hour day going to look like in 2030? Your day. Describe your typical 24-hour day, right? And what's been fascinating for me is that people project the country they're in, Japan, for example, and what their day is going to be like is very different than the life they were living.
Right.
And then the next question is, okay, what are the challenges we're going to face to reach that? And how can technology support that? And what can you do today to start creating that future that you've already seen? And most people don't have a 2030 vision or have a future vision, right? And so I think if you thought about in the context of what are you going to cut in your life? What do you not need? Whether that's getting on a train or commuting or whatever, or the clutter in your house, or all the crap that somebody's asking you to read through, right? What are you going to keep? And then what are you going to make new? How are you going to shift your life in a positive way moving forward?
Right. Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. Cut, keep, create. I think that's something that's very helpful to keep in mind. So in terms of this is my last question, but after that, we're going to move on to the attendees' questions. But what do you think, what do you see yourself focusing on in the next little bit, short-term goals? I understand that you just wrote a book. What's next for you after that? Are you going to be drilling this concept of cut, keep, create, or what do you think?
I will continue to use that as a reflector for people because I think it's really powerful, especially in this existing context. But I've spent the last month and a half studying very carefully how effectively AI can assess things. What are the learning models and processes upon which we can best create the most amazing people who have filled their hearts with love and want to work together and can find harmony, diversity, and empathy together, but have enough IQ to be able to then continue to search and connect the unconnected? Right. Is what I've been focusing on. I'm very much I'm going to start an ed tech company, and I'm looking at all kinds of different partners around this space. And I'm really lucky because I have some of the most amazing mentors in the world that are in my life that I've been asking about, whether it's what do you see as the learning models we should drop into to the digital world? What's the accreditation model? How can we best assess? Because one of the things that a shaman that I've been working with shares, he says, energy flows where attention goes. And so what we assess, what we're being assessed upon, if that's a partner relationship, if that's within an organization you're working, if that's what you're being tested on in a school environment, that's what we will do. Right. And there's a lot of bias in assessment. And so I'm really looking very carefully at how can we use this tool of technology to really take away as much as possible of the unnecessary things that the governments are asking us to learn in an authentic way, assess it, and then allow for more personalized learning to take place, because we all go at our own pace and we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. So I have this vision that we have these digital portfolios in our own private cloud. There's a thing that called digital twins. So more and more, we're going to have this online brain that's going to be built and built and built. And so my idea is it'd be really cool to have our own little private cloud and we kind of do in some ways, that all the things we've learned, everything we've bookmarked is all there. And then we have a history of ourselves, and then we can organize that. And when we have to go for a job, or we have to go try to apply for something or share something, we have all this knowledge there and memory there that will share us, showing us from 5 years old all the way up to whatever, 55 years old, our life. And our memory, what's interesting about memory is our memory changes. That was another big aha moment for me, is our memory changes. And so how do we keep that memory, our memory in a way, because this is what we see. What's also interesting, when you look at something that's been digitalized, you have it through your own eyes, but then there's how the camera sees it as well, which is a little bit of a different perspective. So that's also kind of interesting, the convergence of those two. So to answer your question, I can't remember when I've been more focused on really seeing what I can do to create a model that would really help nurture the confidence of the 1.5 billion children around the world. And the other interesting thing is they're predicting in the next 5 to 10 years, every person in the world will have access to the internet, and we could have devices in their hands. And imagine if that bias I was sharing before, where the children in a developing country, and I'm not talking about the developing country of the United States of America, although it's a developing country in so many ways right now.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of kids that are illiterate in America, which is really shocking. But anyway, if you think about, in our mind, the developing countries, the new Asia that's coming on, and then Africa and so on, imagine if those children had access to the best resources available. Yeah. The personalized learning profile that took them through that journey in a way that was interesting and engaging and didn't turn off the light to learn new things. I am so excited about this, and AI is only going to get stronger, and these digital portfolios are just going to become more and more. So I really see an amazing, bright future of how to disrupt how we know learning in a formal way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Very well put. Patrick, we have another question from our attendees right now. So I think this is the perfect time to sort of shift from the interview portion into the Q&A. We're going to be opening up the floor to questions. So if anyone missed the announcement earlier, head over to the Experience Series Facebook page and comment any question that you might have for Patrick over here. So let's read this one. It says, triggered by this quarantine, Japanese private middle schools and high schools in Tokyo have applied an online education system, like most schools. However, public schools have denied to apply one due to possible discriminations towards financially poor households who aren't equipped with Wi-Fi or internet connecting environments. Do you see a disparity of intelligence occurring as a result of this outbreak? That's a very good question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, it's about access. And if you don't have access to something, then your knowledge is very limited. Right. And so, absolutely. And so one of the interesting things was there was a learning platform that I've been having a discussion with, and it focuses on music. And they were speaking with some of the major music companies in Japan. And the music company decided not to do their online learning platform. And music's a really interesting one. When you think about all the people now that are tuning their guitars, yeah, using apps.
Yep, I do.
Right?
Yeah.
So the ability to allow for AI to really start to assess us developing our music aptitudes kind of thing, right, is huge. But the music company did not end up purchasing or using this. They have like 150 music schools in Japan because most of the schools didn't have the internet that was available. And most Japanese schools do not even have the internet. Now I think it's in 2 or 3 years from now, every Japanese school is supposed to have access to the internet. And I think that's been accelerated now. My guess with Society 5.0 and the push for 5G, that in Japan, that's going to be narrowed and the importance of this is going to shift. One of my friends who works very closely with the Prime Minister, Abe, has taken some advice, I think, from Masayoshi Son, which is having people focus more on understanding what AI is and what AI is about, and kind of developing some of the digital literacies to help balance that out a little bit. But to answer your question, absolutely. You know, if you only have access to the 5 elders in your village, or you have access to the worldwide internet. There's quite a difference there.
Definitely. Yeah. So obviously the concern is that there are lots of people out there who would get left behind in these advancements. Now, we have another question. So what do you think is the reason that education systems haven't changed to keep up with technological advancements? Now, obviously this touches on what we just spoke about how, you know, some households and some communities can't keep up with these advancements. Now,
it's not, okay, so one of the biggest challenges, this is what excites me, is that, you know, the governments have to try to assess the millions of children that they have the responsibility for educating. Mm-hmm. And it's been very difficult to assess millions of children in a really authentic, qualitative way.
Yeah.
So they've had to really, and like, again, you know, where energy goes where the attention flows. So if you're being assessed on memorization type tests or multiple choice tests or things that are very extremely quantitative, mm-hmm. and not qualitative, it's going to really limit that environment and what you can do.
Right.
And that's why I'm really excited, because I think there's an opportunity to really get a lot more kind of qualitative learning that could be quantified. Mm-hmm. And then AI could look at it and really start to shift that. What's happening in little pockets, a lot of people talk about Singapore or Finland or whatever. I'm sorry, but you could put the population of Singapore in, you know, in Shibuya-ku and Minato-ku in Tokyo. I mean, it's not even, you're not comparing apples and apples here. You have a very agile kind of situation that's really easy to shift and move. So I think the biggest challenge has been, and the other thing is that the adults are so used to doing things and don't really want to change.
Yeah.
And in Japan, I have this saying, it's called Jama no Oji-san, which is the very kind of shitsune, rude way is to say old men who get in the way. But and they're good people. They went to the right college and they studied hard and they did everything they were supposed to do. And they went up the escalator. Now they have the power and they have the pocketbooks, but they've never really had to deal with taking risk or rapid change. And so they're really limited in what they're used to and they're comfortable with. And all of a sudden they're being disrupted. And one of the things I learned when been involved in the Singularity University community is every single industry will be disrupted in the next 10 years, including education. Look what's happening with healthcare. Look what's happening with cars. Look what's happening with right now with the real estate industry. Almost everything is going to be disrupted. So going into the lifelong learners thing, we don't have a choice. But you might as well be learning something that has purpose, that you love. And even if you're not into science, something with some science base. And one thing that's been really, really interesting for me over the last 5 years is seeing how accurate science fiction and sci-fi is in predicting the future.
Yeah, kind of scary. It's exciting, but it's also pretty terrifying.
Right, it depends how you look at it, right? If you want to get into the dark side of it, yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So, now you mentioned Singapore and Finland. Now I wanted to ask you, actually, let me see. This is the question that we got from a Hive member, anonymously. Is there a country or a culture with the right attitudes when it comes to lifelong learning? And is there one example that we should all be modeling ourselves after?
I think there's bits and pieces.
What's
wonderful about, say, the Scandinavian countries is that, so here's the interesting thing, right? Another kind of aha moment I had was that when you're thinking about what countries do, most countries have a reaction to a problem they have or something they have to solve. Right? So a problem they may have in Singapore, or a problem they may have in China, or a problem they may have in Sweden or Finland or Denmark, some are the same, but a lot of them are different. And so we spend our time trying to solve the problems that we have and the challenges we have, right? So Singapore, for example, I always say the #1 export out of Singapore is human intelligence. They have no resources. So they should be the leader in learning in the world. And they have something called the skills future, which I'm going to be speaking with the chief scientist officer next week about how they're using these skills to promote lifelong learning and have adults redevelop their skill set. Right? Sweden, Finland, Denmark, they're in the north of Europe. They're kind of not in the middle of nowhere, but they're in the middle of nowhere. So they have to be global. They have to think globally. They have a lot of nature, so it's natural that they would be connecting with nature and looking at things. It's a collectivist society. It's a socialist society, so people think about others and each other kind of thing, right? So you have this more nature-based, thinking about other people, trying to solve problems, curious about the world because there aren't too many Finnish people in the world or people from Iceland, right, kind of thing. So it's a reflection, I think, really upon the challenges you have in the environment that you're in. Sadly to say, there's pockets, but there isn't really anybody that even has it close to what we really need to evolve towards. So this is a major global problem.
Right. So I think we have time for one final question. I just want to ask, so this question right here, it says, what skills should we be learning now to prepare for the future? Now, I know that you said science, obviously, and every industry is going to be disrupted. But according to your view, what should people be focusing on?
So what's really interesting is, so one of the things I do when I'm working with executives or I'm working with people at all level ages, but so it's with my students as well, is I'll say, okay, so the World Economic Forum has articulated 10 skills that you need. And so I would look at the World Economic Forum skills, and when I ask people to say, choose 4 of them that you're good at, that are your kind of strengths.
Yeah.
Find 3 or 4 technologies that you have interest in. So if you think about this whole exponential technology world, I mean, there wasn't a person who was really a specialist in nanotechnology or virtual reality or augmented reality or AI or whatever. These didn't exist really 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So anybody who's an expert now really dug deep and really learned about them. So take your existing superpowers and whatever metrics that you use. LinkedIn has them as well. There's a partnership for 21st century skills. I think the name Bastille it's called now. So if you type in future skills, you'll see these different skills. And then also, you know, I mentioned the Gallup Strengths Finders kind of interest as well to see what your traits are like.
Yeah.
And just the main thing is, you know, so there's like the 4 C's, is creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, right? And then there's things about agility as well, cognitive agility. There's a lot of them that are kind of out there, and they're soft skills. And the other thing that's interesting I'm looking at is how well can AI or technology assess these as well.
Right.
And let's put our attention in those, because those are the human side of things. So let's be human and let technology allow us to be more human. Right. But let's also understand ourselves and have a higher self-awareness of ourselves. And so often the way our education system is set up is it tells us what we're not good at. But I think that's also ridiculous because, you know, for example, one of my daughters who I was with yesterday, she hasn't been that interested in school and highly academic, but then she put her mind to it. And out of 180 students in her vet school program she was in, she was 1 or 2 in that school, and 180 students, there was 60 left after 2 years. And she was the top or number 2 student. But she was told she wasn't good at science when she was younger. So really it comes down to believing in yourself, having a strong passion for something and going for it. And through grit, you can work through that. And if you look at, like I said, the future skills, a lot of them are soft. It's the ability to be open-minded. It's the ability to work. It's a lot of the human things that we're looking at.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Patrick, on that note, it has been an absolute delight speaking to you this evening. Would you like to add anything before we close this up?
I guess the only thing I would like to say is I know for some people, maybe you've lost your jobs or you're feeling some of your basic Maslow's hierarchy needs aren't being met right now. And it must feel like a really, really difficult time. And for those who haven't, who were probably living a life, somewhat of a zombie life and a life of that lacked maybe the happiness and connection with the people and family that you have, look at this as a major, wonderful opportunity to really shift your life in a different direction that hopefully will serve you for many years to come. And I think the most important thing is find your purpose and stay curious.
Absolutely. Amen. All right. On that note, thank you so much, Patrick. And thank you to everyone who has tuned in to tonight's edition of the Experience series. It's been an absolute delight and very educational. If anybody would like to stay tuned for our next Experience series, there will be a few more this month. So make sure you follow the Experience series page on Facebook. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been an absolute delight. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
All right, have a great night, guys.
You too.
Bye.